Hey everyone. I came on today. I wanted to talk about something that's been noodling around in my brain the last couple days. Actually, for a long time, but it really came up now, and I suppose so because we've entered into cancer season, and also because of just everything going on, both in the world, but specifically here in my home country, the United States of America. Right? There's just a lot of turbulence going on in this country, um, as we are what I believe in late stages of patriarchy, right? And I'll give you my definition of patriarchy. Patriarchy is a system of society where there is a massive imbalance between the masculine and the feminine. Um, and also, in my belief, this comes out of something in psychology called sociopathy. And when I look at, and I have a degree in psychology, not that that makes me an expert, but I've have a background of study in it. And when I was studying sociopathy, what stood out to me is that all of the different types of unhealthy psychological aspects that comprise sociopathy. So sociopathy isn't one specific thing. It's about 20 plus different behaviors, unhealthy behaviors. And an unhealthy behavior is a natural aspect of psychology that is blown out of proportion, right? So that it becomes unhealthy. So it's an extreme. So it's a group of 20 something unhealthy behaviors that if you have enough of these behaviors, it's considered sociopathic. And what stood out to me, for example, narcissism is one of those behaviors. Grandiosity is one of those behaviors. That's sort of grandiose ideas of your own self-importance. Those are those kind of behaviors. A lack of empathy is part of that, right? And I think it really comes to all of those types of behaviors point to a serious detachment from our inner feminine. And so let's put it in, because I talk about spirituality, let's put it into terms of spirituality. This, for one reason or another, it's this extreme lack of connection to the inner feminine. And the inner feminine it represents not only our own sense of worth and value, our innate sense of worth and value, meaning that sense of value that we have that is independent of anything we do, independent of other people's judgments of us or recognition of us. It's that our own individual recognition of what is innately valuable about us. And if you don't have that, that's where we start to get into trouble. We get into fear. We start to get thirsty for that external approval, right? Or those external things that we think are going to help us gain that sense of inner worth, inner value, inner knowingness, all of that kind of stuff, right? So in my belief, sociopathy is that extreme disconnection from the inner feminine. The inner feminine also represents our ability to connect with others, right? To see ourself in others. And when you're disconnected from that, again, you have that lack of empathy, right? And patriarchy is an expression of that condition. And I believe that the world has been dealing with sociopathy and patriarchy for several thousand years now. I believe that, in small tribal communities, a sociopathic behavior stands out really clearly because the group is pretty small. It's really easy to see that, hey, that person is behaving really differently than everybody else. Everyone can see it. It's really easy. There's kind of nowhere for them to hide. But as we gained knowledge in agriculture, funny enough, that started to change. Our group started getting larger because with the ability to grow food on demand, we no longer had to have everybody involved in food production, right? Our groups could get larger. There was a division of labor. Some people could make bricks. Other people could make, wooden objects. We started having houses and cities. And so we had much larger groups. With the division of labor, these groups weren't really connected to one another in a way that we were during our smaller tribal units. And so it was a lot more difficult to see when one person was behaving oddly, right? And since we as human beings tend to project our own inner nature on everyone around us, if you're not sociopathic, then you don't expect other people to behave that way. You expect people to live and behave the way that you do. All of our current studies right now indicate that about 1% of the human population has some level of sociopathic behavior. And again, psychology is never an all or nothing. It's behaviors that are on a spectrum, right? And so, and we all fall somewhere on that spectrum. And so you can have very mild sociopathic behaviors, or you can have very extreme sociopathic behaviors, right? It's not an all or nothing kind of thing. It never is. It never will be. That's just kind of the beauty of our system, is that it's always a gradient. But anyway, so approximately 1% of the population has sociopathic behaviors, and it's not a coincidence that we always talk about the 1%. And how the 1% are running everything and are sort of unfairly garnering the majority of the Earth's resources. Right? This is part of that issue, and I believe that what the Earth is going through in the human population is similar to what happens when we get ill. Something goes wrong, and it takes a while for our body's immune system to recognize what's going on and effectively deal with it, right? And so I believe that's where we're at. We're kind of at an end stage of this, where as a global population, we're finally really starting to see get clear about what sociopathic behavior looks like and how it can really negatively affect our world societies if we don't do anything about it, right? If we don't adjust for it. And I'm not even saying that, we just lock up all the sociopathic behave, people and, put them in. No, that's not it either. But, knowledge is the antidote, right? The knowledge to know when someone is behaving in a way that's unhealthy and you don't participate in that, right? So the only way sociopathic people can affect our society is if we allow them to, right? And you can just say, for example, we don't need to make any rules or laws about if you are tested and you're sociopathic, then you can't hold any power. We can just all be really aware of what sociopathic behavior looks like and say, oh yeah, no, I'm not voting for that person, right? That's a healthy way of adjusting for this thing. So anyway, I believe that we're in the stages of learning about this and spotting it and, adjusting for that in our society. And so why I'm getting, what does this have to do with anything about the United States and the cancerian season? Well, the United States, it's, we know exactly when it was founded as a nation. It was on July 4th, and it was actually in the late morning of July 4th. I don't know if we know the exact time, but when I was digging into the records, it did say that the final draft of the Declaration of Independence was approved in the late morning of July 4th. Late morning, July 4th, right? So, and I know that there's a timeline, right? So on July 2nd, the Continental Congress voted to basically do the Declaration of Independence, right? So they said, yeah, we're gonna create this declaration and we're gonna post it, right? So they voted to approve it, but then we had to go in and create the actual final version of the declaration, and this is going to be the foundation upon which our nation rests. So there was a lot of edits going on. Some Jefferson wanted to talk more about the ills of the slave trade, but there were enough states, both northern and southern, that had participated in the slave trade enough to where they didn't want that, right? And so he had to remove that part. But anyway, it wasn't until late morning on July 4th that the delegates voted to approve the final draft, right? And the final draft is when our nation was born. That was the final draft, right? And that day, the majority of the delegates signed it, but all of the delegates didn't sign it until August 2nd because of travel and things like that back in 1776, right? So, they approved the creation and the dissemination of the Declaration of Independence on July 2nd. John Adams actually thought that that's the day everybody was going to celebrate. But that the final version was approved on July 4th, and then it was fully signed by August 2nd. So anyway, that's why we say July 4th is kind of like the day that our nation was founded. And one of the really unique things about the United States is that, as far as we know, for the very first time in recorded history, a nation was founded not on, tribal, religious bases, things like that, right? But on an ideal. They founded this on an ideal. These ideals go all the way back to, I think the kind of the earliest reference was these declarations of freedom in Europe that were happening throughout the centuries, and also a lot of the Enlightenment philosophies going on. John Locke and others. John Locke, who was an English philosopher, spoke of life, liberty, and property. Jefferson didn't want it to be so concrete, so he used life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the United States was founded upon an ideal of freedom and liberty and justice and self-determination, meaning that no kings, right? No kings. And it was supposed to be a republic where everyone came together, and it wasn't perfect, but they did the best they could at the time. There's that saying that says pick your battles, right? And it was hard enough to get all 13 states to agree to this. They certainly were not going to get all 13 states to agree to the highest ideal of this. But I think what they got down was really important, and it set a note for the rest of us to follow. And as we can see, it's being attacked. It's being attacked right now. All of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are being attacked by sociopathic people who, part of their mental illness is that because they feel so empty inside, because of that detachment from the feminine, that they seek to control everything outside. When you don't feel solid on the inside, you want to control everything on the outside because you feel very vulnerable and weak. And that's where sociopathy really comes from. It's this deep vulnerability, this deep emptiness, this deep vulnerability, and the desire to control everything because of that, right? So it's also very interesting that based on that, our nation was founded in the middle of cancer season, or pretty close to the middle. In the cancer, we'll just say in cancer season, and that our nation, therefore, was born in a feminine water sign, and the sign that's often referred to as the mother of the zodiac. I honestly think that Taurus is the mother of the zodiac, but Cancer. I think Cancer is called the mother of the zodiac because that's where, in that sign, that's where the soul comes down. That's where the masculine and feminine come together. It's the sign of inner alchemical union of the masculine and feminine, right? Because the sign for Cancer is, the two units like this coming together. It's also the Merkaba, which is the masculine triangle and the feminine triangle coming together in union to create the whole. And so that's where the soul comes through and really anchors itself down into this world, into this body. But I'm going to read a little bit from this book called America, Nation of the Goddess, the Venus Families, and the Founding of the United States. It talks about how the founders were Freemasons, and Freemasonry. According to the author, he believes that, or they believe that Freemasonry was the next evolution of the Knights Templar, and the Knights Templar were founded by a unique, or a Catholic bishop, cardinal, and eventually pope for a while. That's back when popes were voted in and out of office, who was really the person who introduced the Virgin Mary as the Queen of Heaven in Catholic, in the Catholic realm, right? He was a devotee of the Virgin Mary, and up until him, the Virgin Mary really didn't play that big of a role, but he promoted her, and when he was Pope, he had her instituted as the Queen of Heaven, right? And they talk about how this really goes back to, it's a continuation of the Isis mystery religions, right? So this is just a continuation of the Isis mystery religions, the Virgin Mary, and then so the founding of our nation. I'm going to read an excerpt out of this. They're talking about Washington, D.C. and its construction. So Washington, D.C. is situated specifically right between Virginia and Maryland. And if you look at those two words, the root beginning of them is, of Virginia is virgin, and the root beginning of Maryland is Mary. So you have Virgin Mary. The Washington, D.C. D.C. means District of Columbia. Columbia is the goddess of our country. The goddess of our country. And he says, most of the major countries of the world have a patron goddess. For example, in Britain, she is called Britannia. In France has the patron goddess Marianne. And an independent United States would be no different in this regard. And even prior to the American War of Independence, the goddess of the United States was Columbia, which is also the name of the district in Washington, in which Washington, the city, stands. So Washington, the city, is in the District of Columbia, which is the goddess of our nation, right? The goddess of our nation. She's cancerian and represents the mother and the divine union between the masculine and the feminine, right? So the Washington was custom built, right? Had never existed even before the War of Independence. So, and if you want to dive deep into more Washington, D.C., there's a book called City of the Goddess, Freemasons, the Sacred Feminine, and the Secret Beneath the Seat of Power in Washington, D.C. So, as far as it concerns Washington, D.C., in particular, it drew attention to the tremendous number of goddess statues to be found throughout the city. Goddesses are to be found at almost every intersection throughout the public spaces of Washington, D.C., and on most public buildings there. Taken individually, these do not appear particularly surprising, especially when it is borne into mind that the predominant building style used to create Washington, D.C. was classical revival. This was a type of architecture that became immensely important in the 18th century, and its buildings were closely copied from those of ancient Greece and Rome. As a result, statuary was not unusual in architecture at the time, but nevertheless, the proliferation of representations of goddesses in Washington, D.C. must be considered excessive. Again, pick your battles, right? They had to do things on the down low. A lot of this stuff was done and it was seemingly random or just of the current fashion at the time, but it held an extreme importance to the founders of this country, all who were Freemasons and all part of this legacy of the feminine mystery schools of Isis. The largest and most important of all goddess statues is that of the Goddess of Armed Freedom, which is a colossal bronze statue, 19.5 feet high. She stands at the very top of the dome of the Capitol. Therefore, apart from the Washington Monument, she occupies the highest position in Washington, D.C. There were political reasons why this statue acquired the name she has, and also regarding her appearance and clothing. But in truth, the real name of the statue should be Columbia, which is the goddess of our nation, and also the Oversoul. She represents the Oversoul of our nation, right? And I'll show you a picture, and you can go and look this up yourself. Where is it? There we go. So this is, and sorry, it's not bigger. But you get the idea. And you can see that she's holding a sword, but also a laurel wreath. And at the top, she's at the top of our seat of power in Washington. And it does not say "In God We Trust." It says "E Pluribus Unum." "E Pluribus Unum" is Latin, and this is the motto of our nation, which is "From many come one," or "Out of many one," right? This is the motto of our nation. This is the goddess of our nation. This is the Oversoul of our nation. Out of many, one. And that idea is really important, which is also being attacked, right? You look at the people who are attacking this idea of the sort of out of many, one, this idea of unity. And you get posts like this that say the lessons from New York City is that both illegal and legal immigration can ruin your country. It's not just the open border. It's also our suicidal mass legal migration policies bringing in over 1 million people a year. And so, there's this attack against the other, the outside, this fear that if we let people in, somehow it's gonna destroy our nation. It's gonna ruin us. But all you have to do is look back in our history, which is, as a country, is not that long. So it's easy to see all the tremendous positive changes that have occurred as we allow people from all parts of the world, all cultures to come into our country. They add tremendous value to our nation and to our culture and society. And yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. Like, if you've ever dated somebody and then moved in with them, it's hard. It's easy when you can each go to your own apartment and have your own space, and that separation, that time to yourself. It's it's easy to date people like that. But then when you decide to move in together, ooh, that's really hard. And then have kids, that's even harder, right? Like it's hard. It's hard. One of the things that our country does, which I don't know if we do this knowingly or not, or if it's just kind of an unconscious manifestation, is we air our dirty laundry. We talk about all the bad stuff going on, like the Jerry Springer shows and things like that. And other people around the world, back in the 80s and 90s when those were becoming really popular and famous, they would be like, what's wrong with you Americans? Why do you go on television and talk about all the crazy stuff that's going on in your life? That should be done in private. But I think that openness about everything that's going wrong with our country is a strength, because it allows us to be aware. And so even though I don't I don't agree with that post, what that person posted, it's important for them to be able to make those posts so that we can all be aware that that person feels that way. And then we can have an open dialogue about, well, why do you think this is a problem? But if you keep it under cover, then it's going to fester. That wound is going to fester. And so, our country went through a time where we said it's not okay to talk about these kinds of things. But we should always have space to allow people to express whatever they're feeling in a healthy way, right? That's the other part of that. It's got to be in a healthy way. And we have to not shame them for it, but instead try to understand. And I am not a saint by any means. I have spent a lot of my life being angry at people like that, being judgmental. But I've come to understand that it's in the openness and holding space where we get the growth, right? That's where we come together. If you don't feel safe to share your feelings and opinions, regardless of what they are, you don't have a space to learn and grow in your community, right? And that's really tough, because some feelings are and ideas are really hurtful and ugly. But if you don't look at that, imagine if every person on this earth was fearful about cutting into a human being. We would never have surgery. We wouldn't have those people who are willing to literally work on, abdominal wounds and things like that, like the really just scary, ugly aspects of having a human body. And thank God we have people like that, because they're able to go in and save lives, right? Whereas most of us, we would just faint, because that is just overwhelming for us. But anyway, so the point of all of this is to recognize these aspects about our country, so that if you are concerned and upset about the direction our country is going, I urge you to, or invite you to, try to connect with the oversoul of our country. And you don't have to be American, right? America is big enough that we affect everybody right now, for better or for worse. And so anyone around the world who is concerned about America and what's happening in this country, I invite you to pull up a picture of Colombia and connect with her and send her prayers and well wishes and all of that kind of good stuff, right? E pluribus unum. I actually think that the United States is kind of a miniature United Nations, right? I don't know of any other country in the world that has every a representation of every population in the world. Like you take the people that we're at war with. We have Russians that live here, and they're accepted. We have Iranians that live here, and they're accepted. We have Chinese that live here, and they're accepted. And no, this was not an easy thing. Again, we even had the Chinese Exclusion Act written into our Constitution at one point because we were afraid of how many Chinese people were coming over during the late 1800s. But go to any major city in America now during the Lunar New Year, and there's a Chinese parade, and people, even non-Chinese people are celebrating the Chinese New Year. And so that's what happens. We get fearful and we wrestle with that, but eventually we start to see like the fun and interesting and positive aspects of this culture that's, invading us, and that we start to adopt them. There was a point in time where we had signs up in this country that said Irish need not apply. So if you were from Ireland, this was during the horrible famine in Ireland, where unfortunately the biggest crop in Ireland was a single kind of potato that grew really well, and it got hit by a fungus, and their entire nation's main crop failed, and they had no food, and people were dying of starvation, and the people were desperately fleeing anywhere they could to try and live. And of course, the country that had the most land and the greatest opportunity was America. And so, the people that were already there were, of course, afraid of this flood of Irish people, where if you look at the size of Ireland, it's ridiculous to think that there was a flood of Irish people that could overwhelm this country. But that's just how the mind works, right? We're not very good at putting things into perspective and balance. But nowadays, we love the Irish. We have St. Paddy's Day parade, Irish this, Irish that. So anyway, I'm going to end it there. And maybe at some point I'll go and do a deeper dive on America and, maybe create an astrological chart. I kind of looked up a couple of astrological charts on America, and a lot of them have it set for between 5 and 6 p.m. in the evening, and I don't know why, because our National Archives clearly state that the vote was finalized in the late morning. So I put that around 11 to 11:30, could be early, it could be, 10 or something like that. I don't know. So I don't know why they have it as, 5 or 6 p.m. Maybe that's when the announcements went out. But just because the baby was born in the morning and the announcement goes out in the evening doesn't mean that the baby was born in the evening. The baby was born in the morning. It doesn't matter when the announcement went out. So anyway, that's it. I hope this helps someone, anyone, and I will see you all next time.